Thank you, Shiv, for joining us today on Let's Talk Business by RealtyNXT.
No, great to be here. Great to be here today.
So, Shiv, I want to know, first of all, the backstory of hBits. How did you come up with this company in terms of what need gap did you notice in the market that made you feel that hBits is required?
So let me start actually by telling you about myself, because I think that journey is a little important, and then how I kind of figured that this was required in the market. So born and brought up in Bombay, did my undergrad outside India, studied at Stanford, studied physics, worked very briefly in New York, but I said all the action is in India. So I moved back to India very quickly. Initially, so that's where I got my exposure to commercial real estate specifically. So I worked with my father, who's into commercial real estate development, just got a grasp of the industry, built my relations in the industry. And then in 2015, in fact, I'd set up one of the first few co-working spaces in India. That time you had your few other players, 91 Springboard, Office.
Yeah.
One of the first few players, they had one center each. WeWork hadn't even entered the market. So no one had heard of co-working then. So set up one center, it did pretty well. I had the option of expanding that into a larger business. But then I decided to go do my MBA at Harvard. Nice. And by the time I came back, co-working landscape had completely changed.
Yeah.
There were 300 different players. WeWork had entered the market. It was a price war. So I said it doesn't make sense to expand this business. So I started looking for other opportunities. And then I observed, to answer your question, that there was a gap in the market, right? On one hand, you had commercial real estate developers who didn't have too many exit options for their properties, right? They'd build the buildings, they'd lease it out. And then there's at that point, only two exit options. One of them is to sell to your large funds, your Blackstones, Brookfields of the world. But they were, buying assets in thousands of crores. Or you could sell floor by floor or unit by unit to ultra HNIs. Right? And there the minimum ticket size of a property may be 20, 30, 50 crores.
Yeah.
So universe of such ultra HNIs is very, very small, right? Maybe a handful of them, few 50 of them in the country. Not only people who have the capital, but also the ability and the knowledge to invest in real estate.
Yeah.
So very few ultra HNIs work in this market. So developers didn't have too many exit options. On the other hand, it's a very attractive asset class to own. For instance, you get 8 to 9% rental yield. You have great tenants, right? Like some of our tenants are ICICI Bank, Mane, which is a French MNC. So amazing tenants, long-term contracts, and good appreciation in commercial real estate, right? In general, 5% year on year you get, because your rental contracts escalate that much. In fact, that's why Blackstone, for instance, has done so well in India.
Yeah.
So thought was that it's a good asset to own, but can't own it only because the ticket size is large for most people.
True.
So the initial thought and vision, and the vision is the same today, is to create a stock market of real estate. So that's where the idea was born out of. And both sides of the market, there was a gap, right? On developers, like I said, limited exit options. On the other hand, amazing investment opportunity. Just needed to reduce the ticket size to provide, a more affordable investment avenue. And from an investor perspective, it's a great product to own, right? I gave the dynamics of this product, but let's compare it to other products as well, right? You have FDs, you have debt instruments that offer 6, 7 odd %. And that's it. That's all you get. Yes, it's safe. It is very safe, but that's all you'll get. Here, it's also pretty safe. Back long-term contracts, you're getting higher than FD, higher than inflation, 8 to 9%.
Yeah.
And then you have equity on the other hand. Equity, you can make a lot of money. You can also lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
Equity can go to zero.
Yeah.
So here at the end of the day, you're still owning a hard asset. There's still a value. So it's a great hybrid between debt and equity that people didn't have access to. And that's where the idea came from. And then obviously, as most startups, most innovations today, it had to be tech enabled, because that's the new way to reach out to people, to give the most value to investors. So that's where the whole idea was born out of.
So initially, I'm sure you must have faced a lot of challenges, because to create that kind of awareness, to make people understand what fractional ownership is and how it's going to benefit them. So what were those challenges, and how did you overcome, those particular challenges?
Yeah, so initial challenges, yes, there are. Especially in such an industry where you're So our minimum ticket size then and our minimum ticket size now for investment is 25 lakh. So it's not a small sum of money for anyone.
Yeah.
And as a startup, asking someone to invest 25 lakhs is not an easy task, right? And sure, I had a good degree, a good background, good educational background, but that doesn't mean anything when you're getting someone to invest.
True.
You know, because there they care about scale, comfort, trust, etc., which didn't have any background in that, right? And they also want to see gray hair at times.
Yeah.
They didn't have any of those. And I'll give you the story of our first asset that we launched. It was a smaller asset. We started small, 7 crore asset. And I had a team of 4 people. You're not going to have a large team when you start.
Yeah.
And we were sitting in we decided the first asset, checked a lot of boxes, good asset to own, good price, good rental yield, good tenant. So checked all those boxes. So now the thing is, how do we sell it, right? And we had 2 ways of kind of getting your initial customer base, right? We built our MVP, our basic website. At that point, it wasn't a complicated website. And we started digital marketing campaigns, and we started getting customers who at least were interested.
Yeah.
Or not interested in the concept, right? Your Google ads, Facebook ads. So that started flowing in bit by bit. So there are 4 of us, I remember this clearly. There are 4 of us, me plus 3, sitting in a kind of glass conference room. I say glass because 7 crore asset, 25 lakh means we need approximately 30 customers. So on the glass with my marker, I wrote 1 to 30. 1, 2, 3 to 30. And I told my team that, in 30 days, we need to get 30 customers. That was like, let's go out and do it. A lot of energy, a lot of aggression. We were talking to both people from our Facebook campaigns, cold calling. That's how you do it at a startup in the early days, and also trying to work with brokers and channel partners also to get customers. At the end of 30 days, we had 0 customers. So
yeah.
So that maybe it's naivety, and I think maybe a lot of other startup founders will say this. Going in, you don't know how hard it's going to be.
True. Yeah. But in 2019 you started hBits, right? So during that time also, investors or we home buyers starting even with 25 lakhs, people think about, as you mentioned, FD kar lete hain, gold mein invest kar lete hain. Yeah, why not stock? So how did you convince them about fractional ownership?
Yeah, so then, and obviously I was the first salesperson of the company.
Yeah.
So what you have to just show them, there are 2 things, right? First, you have to convince them on the asset, or like the concept of investing in commercial real estate. I remember when I started the business, you asked people, real estate investment, what do you get? 2 to 3%. Because the mindset was, apartment. In apartment, you get 2 to 3% rental. So just that knowledge that in real estate, you get 8 to 9%. Your tenants are MNC tenants, not your, individual families. Your buildings are grade A quality glass facade buildings, not your, old buildings. So one was just that customer education, explaining the customer that this is the dynamics of the product, this is how it works, showing them that this is the agreement that the tenant has, showing them photos of the building, and then displaying all that on our website. That was obviously very important. So explaining the product. And I think the product, in terms of the actual underlying asset, people were, once you explained it to them, they were sold pretty quickly because people understood the numbers, etc. And they're like, okay, this is a very good asset class. It does give good returns. It does give me rental, and it gives me appreciation.
Yeah.
Then the challenge becomes, but then joint ownership, how do you do? You know?
Yeah.
Then you explain them what is investing in a public limited company is joint ownership only.
True.
So established structures do exist. So it's a question of having a conversation, explaining. So then eventually that they also get convinced, and they realize, okay, it makes sense as long as, and we work with the top lawyers at that point in time, even today. So Vadia Gandhi helped us with the whole structure. So that gave them comfort that, okay, structure is safe, it makes sense. You thought of all the possibilities, etc. Then final thing becomes, but then ultimately we are, the ones in charge. So why you? And that's where that, the comfort, the relationship building, the trust comes in. So that's all it comes down to. So those were the 3 main things that we had to discuss with people to get them to invest.
So hBits is quite a captivating name. And I'm sure in beginning your investors must be also asking why hBits and how this name came up. So what's the story behind this?
Yeah, it's a funny name. So we wanted to be little scientific about it, right? So we thought, as catchy a name, startup, new age, as short, you know, so 5 letters, 4 letters, so you don't even get a domain on Google. So 4 letters, not used, like can't be confused with anything else. That was that. Then we brainstormed with the team. What can it be? So we're a prop tech startup, so we wanted to have a flavor of that. So H is the 8th letter in the alphabet. So and there are 8 bits in a byte. So the way bits make up a byte in computers, that way fractions make up the property. So that's the story of the name.
Interesting. So tell me, during the journey of yours, when you started in 2019, there were few players already in fractional ownership, right? So how did you make sure that your hBits as a company stand apart? What was the USP that you have, above the rest of the other players who are there in the market?
So at that time when we started, I remember I thought of this idea, then I looked up online. There was only one other player that was there, a Bangalore-based player. Our USP was always going to be, and is still, our ability to acquire good properties, our ability to manage properties, and our ability to exit properties. Those are the 3 main things. That is ultimately what it comes down to, because all those 3 will give investors good returns. Then we also wanted to be as transparent as possible and provide all information and data to investors. So that's the values that we live on even with today. In terms of acquisition of property, even if you look at our AUM compared to some of the other players, our AUM is lesser. But because we've been very particular in kind of the properties that we bring on our platform, we are much more patient. We think about in long term. We think that it's not really just sell today. It's more that tomorrow we need to give back money to investors.
True.
So that's very important to us. So in terms of acquisition, we look at from a very detailed perspective. We look at building quality. We look at tenant quality. We look at micro market. We look at the strength of the leave and license agreement. We look at the rental value and the capital value in the market. So we work with our data partner CRE Matrix to see in the micro market what is the rental, what is the capital value, and we make sure that we're below that. And we're very patient. So just to give an example, when we listed our recent asset, we looked at about 10,000 crore worth of assets before listing this asset on our platform.
Nice.
Right now, obviously, we have the ability because we have a large team on the real estate side only of 7 people, and I'll talk about that later. But so on the asset acquisition, we're very particular. Even in terms of property management, again, given the background, we've been dealing with and I've learned from my father, we've been dealing with the top tenants. He's had banks as his tenants, he's had MNCs as his tenants, and we know what goes into releasing it. We have great relationships with the admin heads, HR heads of all these MNCs, because that's what you need with the IPCs when you lease to these tenants, because ultimately the game is, again, even for tenants, the game is not to make them come to your property. That's only part of it. The game is also to make them stay, provide good customer service.
True.
And we know how to manage that. So during COVID, just because of that, we had 100% collection of rental and 0% delay. That was because of our tenant selection, the strength of the agreement, and tenants also taking a long-term view with us. And then exit. We are the only player that has historical experience in exit. We've exited, and what I'm saying is, in my father's company, we exited properties. So that knowledge is there. Who are the players to exit to? How to exit? What goes into that? So that is our USP. And then over and above that, the trust, the transparency part. Just providing just constant communication with investors through emails, on their dashboard, providing all this information to investors.
So you're emphasizing more on the patience part, right?
Correct.
So I want to understand, even when it comes to tenants, what kind of checklist does hBits follow to have the right deal in place and to have the right asset in place? But during that time, to follow up to that question also, I want to know, don't you feel in this patience game, there are so many now players getting into fractional ownership? Don't you once feel that you might lose out in this particular property or in this particular investors if you guys be patient enough?
So I'll answer the second question first, right? The losing out, and then about the tenants. See, in terms of patience, I'll just give 2 examples. In 2007, 2008, in real estate in India, people thought land was going to get over in India. It was a rush. There were about, I think, somewhere between 50 to 100 funds, real estate funds that came up then. Barring 4 or 5, all of them shut down because they lost investors' money. And because they're not patient, they're not particular. Even if you look at someone like, and I'm not saying we're anywhere close to him, but if you look at someone like Warren Buffett, what does he preach? You have to get the fundamentals right, and in the long term, you'll have the right investments. So in the short term, fine, we might not be ahead, and then it's what you tell in a children's tale as well, right? The tortoise beats the hare, slow and steady.
True.
So that's how I think about it. And the goal is not to have the largest AUM. The goal is to have good investments. On the tenant part, I'll just talk as a little bit more, micro. So we're very particular on the tenants that we take onto that we kind of get on the platform, and we're very detailed. So one, we study the balance sheet of the tenant, right? And that gives us an idea on the credit rating, stability. If the credit rating is there, we anyways look at the credit rating. If it's not there, we look at kind of the profit margins, what industry it's in, what kind of cash balance they have. So a full, basically, financial checklist.
Yeah.
The way a lender looks at someone, ultimately you're giving a loan. It's not giving a loan, but ultimately the way a lender will look at giving a loan to a company, that same kind of scrutiny we do using the financials of that potential tenant. So that's number one, and it can get more detailed. Number two is we look at the tenant's history in that property. What is their rationale for coming in? What are their plans? We'll have a conversation with the whoever's senior, the HR head or the CFO of that tenant, what their plans are, what their intent is. So for instance, one of the properties we acquired close to here in Andheri was, the tenant is Mane.
Yeah.
So they have a lab there. Now they have a lab, obviously that's even much harder to shift. And because they have a lab, they have very specific kind of employees that they require. Those employees are anyways living close by over here. So then it's going to be very difficult for them to shift. So that's the other thing. Then we look at what kind of tenant improvements or furniture fit out or capex the tenant has put into the property, right? Has the tenant done the civil work? Have they invested in the flooring, fit outs, plumbing, or is the landlord? Because that makes the tenant more sticky as well.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the checks that we do on the tenant, and then we also look at the payment history. So we study the bank statement of between the tenant and the current landlord to see that the payments have come on time.
And what scrutiny goes in terms of the checklist for the serious investors? So for example, if you're having this kind of asset and you want the serious investors for the long term, because as you said, this is a long-term game for you, right?
Yes.
So having the right investor also makes a huge difference, because there can be investors who are looking for long term, but there can be investors who want to just exit after 2 years or 1 year, within few months only. So how you filter that out?
Yeah, so I think what's very important is being completely transparent with the investors as to how this asset class behaves, what kind of return profile it has, the fact that appreciation is really made over the long term in real estate. And we disclose that to the investors. We mention it to the investors that this is a long term investment. That's when you make the real returns. If you look for a quick entry, quick exit, then that's not where you make your real returns. On the flip side, some investors do have emergencies.
Yeah.
Right. So we had an investor. He had a long-term view, but in a year he had a medical emergency of someone in his family, so he needed the capital. So that is one example. But anyone who's wanted to exit prematurely, we've been able to give them the exit.
Okay.
Yeah. The appreciation might not be as high as if you had stayed for long term, but your principal is safe and you still made the rental income during that period of time. So just that transparency, providing that information to investors. That's how we kind of make sure that we have smart, sophisticated investors. That was the other reason that we made sure our minimum ticket size was 25 lakh.
Okay.
Because we also didn't want mis-selling of the product.
True. So when such premature exits happen, how does it affect? I want to understand. I'm sure our viewers would also like to know, how does it affect a complete portfolio? Because there are other investors also involved, right? So do you immediately look for another investor who can fill that gap?
That's how it works.
Okay.
So basically we find another investor, and that happens because now we already have 60,000 registered users on the platform. We have 500 partners that we work with and just growing. So we find someone else to take that investor space. So it doesn't affect the other investors at all. Okay. They keep getting their share. So we give this, another new investor comes in. Generally in a month, 45 days, we're able to find another investor. That's kind of how it's looked like so far.
And are there possibilities where there's no emergency, but the investor feel, okay, it's been a year or 2 year, but they feel there be not much of growth to it? Can they also easily get exit from those?
See, in the same way they can. The growth and the tax efficiency, see, even in terms of taxation, the long-term capital gains kicks in after 3 years.
Yeah.
So even from a tax perspective, it will make sense to wait 3 years. Generally, escalations are either 5% every year or 15% every 3 years. So again, from a appreciation standpoint, it makes sense to wait that. So in every standpoint, if someone just wants to stay for 2 years and exit, they can. They have the option. But the real appreciation will be seen in the long run.
But is there any kind of a lock-in period for these investors?
No, we don't have a lock-in period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because why I ask that, because few players do provide the lock-in, that if you are investing in this particular asset, max to max, you have to be there for 1 year or 2 years. So there's no mandate like that.
We don't have a lock-in period, right? And the reason is we're trying to mirror, just philosophically, we're trying to mirror that if you had 20 crore, 50 crore to invest, you wouldn't have a lock-in period. But at the same time, the 20 crore, 50 crore investor will not get appreciation in 1 year, 2 years. It's all long term. So we want to mimic exactly how it is like to own the full property.
But don't you think it always helps to have a lock-in, because then you have more potential serious buyers in comparison to, let's talk, if I have FD or if I have PPF account, there's always a 5 year, 4 year lock-in period, and it makes sure that you are doing that in terms of investment, right? So when it comes to this,
the only scenario is like these emergency scenarios.
Yeah.
And then we don't want to be the platform scrutinizing whether the person actually has an emergency or not.
True.
Yeah.
That's true.